Hello, welcome to Recapping with Delora
and Ashley.
Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Recapping Podcast.
Also, comment, rate, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We're on all the things.
We would love to hear your ratings of the movies and shows we review.
Email us your audio file to recappingpodcast@gmail.com and we will play it during the show.
Or DM us on Instagram and we will post and read it on air.
Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you.
Hey, Delora.
Hey, Ashley.
So it's been a little minute, but we are back with an In Conversation episode for the peoples.
I'm so excited.
It's always fun to get different perspectives on the pod, different thoughts on the pod. This one is Dr. Michele Foss, one of the lovely ladies I had the opportunity to meet in Atlanta at the Black Podcast Festival, the gift that keeps on giving. So Dr. Foss is a professor of rhetoric and media at Sacramento State, and we dive in, as we usually do, get the highlights of her journey, talk to her about some television, because that is really the main touch point that we have in common from the podcast, and just, give some gems for anybody hoping to follow in her footsteps.
Her story is quite fascinating. It's almost like unreal. And so I'm super excited for everyone to hear our conversation with her.
Well, without further ado, guys, here's our In Conversation with Dr. Michele Foss. Hi, Michele.
Hi.
So excited to have you for our In Conversation series that we've been doing to chat it up with folks who are in the industry, who are interested in TV and film and love all of that as we are. And as I've mentioned already, you are a PhD professor who teaches media criticism, television criticism, rhetoric and social influence. So we're kind of going on the academic side to hear your thoughts and your experience and your journey on, this love and fascination we have with all things entertainment and television. So
indeed. Yes.
So with that, Delora and I are excited to launch into some questions with you.
I can't wait.
The first being, please walk us and our listeners through the highlights of your journey thus far, from growing up in Sacramento, California, to becoming a professor of rhetoric and media at Sacramento State and launching the TV Doctor podcast.
Yes. Well, I'm like, how long do we have? Because it's I think it's an interesting journey. So I got to go all the way back. I got to start kind of towards the beginning. So
we love it.
Okay, great. So I consider myself from Sacramento. Like, my family has deep roots in Sac, like back to the 40s. My family has been in Sacramento, but I was actually born in Oregon and lived there until I was a preteen. And then we moved to we moved back to Sacramento. So in Oregon, that was kind of a unique experience for me because, you could read between the lines and probably figure out why, but
are Black people there? That's
correct. That is that. Exactly. I didn't even have to say it. You already knew. So in the town where I grew, and it wasn't even like city Oregon. It wasn't Portland. It was a little town in Oregon. And my dad was white. My mom was Black. So the number of Black people in the town was 2. Me and my mom.
Wow.
And so, yeah. Like, I did hear a legend of a Black girl that lived like in the next town over. And I was like, oh, I'd like to meet her.
The legend of the other Black
I love it.
The legend of the other Black girl. Right. Race was not something that I necessarily thought about. Like, I knew I was different from everybody else that I grew up with, but I didn't really think about it too much until one day. My dad was the one who took me to school, and my friends were waiting for me, and I guess they'd never seen my dad. And so we pull up out in front of the school, and I hop out and I walk up to them, and they're like, oh, And I was like, what's going on? They were like, well, we didn't know you were adopted. And I was like, I'm adopted? I didn't know that either. Wow. Like, okay. So I get home after school that day And I'm talking to my mom and I'm like, yeah, so let's talk about me being adopted. And she's like, you're not adopted. What are you talking about? And I'm like, well, the homies said that my dad is white and I'm Black. So that means I'm adopted. She was like, okay, all right. That's
Mama, let's have a conversation.
I guess now we're talking about this. So my mom and I used to watch TV all the time. Like, she's the one that is almost single-handedly responsible for my TV nerddom.
This is our origin story as well.
See, perfect. Yes. Great. I'm in a safe space here. I feel that. TV was never like a babysitter for me. My mom definitely encouraged me to be very thoughtful and critical, even at a very, very young age, of what I was watching. So it would be like, wow, well, what do you think that boy meant by that? And, oh, well, that talking flower is very interesting. And, what does that mean? Even from a very young age. So she knew that in that moment of trying to explain to me something as complex as race and ethnicity, and mixed race at that, she knew that she could probably go into that well of TV examples to give me something that would help me make sense of what it was. And so she was like, okay, Star Trek, because that was one of our favorite shows that we would watch together.
Yes.
So she's like, okay, Star Trek, let's talk about Spock. And she's like, so what is Spock? And I was like, he's the science officer. And she's like, no, I mean, like, where's he from? And I was like, well, he's Vulcan. And she was like, okay, is he just Vulcan? And I was like, well, his mom is human, but he's Vulcan though. And she was like, oh, okay. But I mean, kind of, he's both though, right? Because if he's a little bit of what his mom is and a little bit of what his dad is, and that's how, people live, right? That's how people work. And I was like, yeah, but when he's on the Enterprise, he's the only Vulcan. So the only thing that everybody around him sees, they don't see the human parts of him. They just see the Blackness, basically, right? They just see the Vulcan because it's what's different from them. So I was like, wait a minute, am I Spock? And she was like, yeah, I mean, if you're okay with that, yeah, that's basically what's going on in your life. So I was like,
love that.
So sweet.
Am I into it? I was like, I love that. So, from that point on, it was pretty easy for me to understand, even, as a little kid, it was easy for me to understand something so complex as race. And TV was the way through that. So, okay. So I go into the world and I'm still enjoying TV, but I'm recognizing that I'm using it. I'm using television to help me figure out the things in life that are confusing or challenging or frustrating in some kind of way. I go to college and I end up studying communication and film at that point. Then when I decided to go to grad school, it was really just because I was kind of terrified of the quote unquote real world, didn't feel ready to get into that 9-to-5, be a grown-up life. So I was like, well, I'm just terrified of that. So I'm going to try to keep going to school. I just want to keep going to school.
Student.
Exactly. My second term in grad school, I took this class in media criticism. And the professor comes into the room and he takes all of these books that we're going to be reading and he spreads them out on the table. And he's like, okay, these are our books. And one of them caught my eye and I got a little prop. It was this book.
Name the book for us, Michele, just for our audience and listeners.
Enterprise Zones, Critical Positions on Star Trek. This was one of the books that we were supposed to be reading for school. And I was like, I have a question. It's day one, right? I'm like, do you mean to tell me that I am in graduate school and we're going to be talking about Star Trek? And he's like, yep. So I was like, okay, follow-up question, please. Do you then mean to suggest that it is your job, it is your profession to watch TV like Star Trek and talk to the people about TV and write about TV, and that's your job? People give you money to do that? And he was like, it's a little bit more than that, but yes. And I was like, but that's it. Sign me up. I don't care what else you say. The rest of the time I know you, I have found it.
Yep.
So it's basically my job to watch TV which guess what? I was going to be doing that anyway. And and talk to people about the things that I find cool and interesting and meaningful in TV. And that's my job. Like, yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that till the wheels fall off. You know, what started as just my mom kind of being creative on the spot and figuring out how to help me through one of those, the trickier parts of life, you know, the parts of life that are harder to understand. From that moment, I grow up to basically do that. And that's actually how the podcast was born too, because I started thinking, okay, well, you know, I love my students and I love working with my students and helping them understand this very special medium that I love so much. But my classes are like, you know, 25 students a semester. And I'm like, I want to share this with more people. You know, I think it's interesting. I think it's fun. I want to tell everybody. That's how the idea for the TV doctor was born. I'm not a doctor on TV, but I play one in real life. Like my job is still a lot of fun.
Yes.
Thank you.
I love that slogan. That epiphany happened for me with, I got to do a paper on War of the Roses. And War of the Roses is one of my favorite films. And the teacher was like, if you've seen the movie, you don't have to come to class. I was like, I own the movie. Okay, I'll be at the house.
You're like, I can do a performance of it right now. What do you want?
Exactly.
It's so funny. I attended Bowling Green State University, and one of my electives, or several of my electives, was in pop culture. They have a pop culture degree that you can get there. Yeah. And so I have written papers on the evolution of boy bands and Tina Turner and Ike. It's a phenomenal thing when you are able to put what you know and love into something productive like education and things along those lines. So I want to ask you, you explain your love for TV, but what about movies and music?
Yeah, I love all of it. I am a hardcore pop culture junkie, but if we're ranking, TV is first. There's something special for me about television in that it's what they call the people's medium. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but again, I feel safe here, so I'm just going to say whatever.
You are.
There's a little elitism in film still that, you know what I mean? And so, you know, film and folks who create film and folks who study film have a tendency to look down their noses a little bit at TV, which is ridiculous, right? Art is art. You don't hear painters talking about, oh, you do pencil work? How cute, right? How quaint.
Versus watercolor versus...
Exactly. Like, yeah.
I'm an artist.
Right?
I'm an
exactly. It's
modes of
exactly
expressing the art. Yeah,
exactly.
Funny
so yeah,
too.
no, I'm into all of it, but I have a special place in my heart for like the scrappy little underdog of TV. Which ain't so much an underdog anymore, by the way.
By far.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I keep feeling like I'm about to cut you off, but I was going to say,
it's all good.
Funny too is I grew up more so loving movies for sure, but I feel like we've entered such a golden age of television where on the content side, it's just the stories are richer. Yeah. I feel like I enjoy the more long form these days, really being able to navigate through. Character development is very important to me with projects that I really, really get into. And a lot of times you just don't have the bandwidth to do that in a movie unless you're going to do a series of movies.
Correct. That's right.
So a lot of my favorite projects, I'm like, I wish that had been a show now. You know what I mean? Versus a movie.
Right. So, exactly. Well, and because you want to spend more time with it. You know, it's a relationship that you build with the shows that are your favorites, you know, where when it ends, you can go through that, you know, depression, that sadness and grief about the end of the relationship, you know?
Me and Delora even talk about this with books because Delora, well, I'm like, can I get a 7-book series if I really love the series? Delora's like, I cannot do more than 3.
I have a commitment issue when it comes to books. Give me a trilogy, that's ideal.
And that's it.
Yes. But I might go 4 books, but I have actually been on a major novel binge. And to your point, talking about letting the story breathe, when we're able to adapt these novels into television. Chef's kiss.
Yeah.
One of our favorite series during the pandemic was Little Fires Everywhere.
Yes.
Right?
Oh my
and
gosh.
So the ability to let that story breathe.
Yeah.
It was so good.
I really loved that show. But it's interesting thinking about, well, I mean, there's a whole nut to crack there with how do you move from source material and interpret that for a television presentation. Literature to film is easier, right? Because the audience comes in expecting that to be it, right? It starts here, it ends here, it's over. That's the story. And then if there's a sequel or a trilogy, then it's like, oh, I didn't even know. But if it's a TV show, it's almost like we expect it to continue, right?
Yeah.
And so now we're getting these, limited series where it's like, no, you get 10 episodes, that's it. I'm like, well, that's just a film. It's just a long film.
Normal People is the perfect example.
Yeah.
One of our favorites as well.
The very first show that we recapped is Normal People.
Oh, I love that.
And I told Ashley, I randomly started watching it on a rainy day, and it just like a book, you just sink into it.
Yes.
And it gave us all the emotions, right?
Right.
And the fact that it was over, I still was okay with it, but I do understand what you're saying, where it's like, what about the next chapter?
Correct.
It's important to know when to be done too. Because there's some series that when you don't know when to stop,
then I'll stop for you.
Yeah. And I don't want to say Big Little Lies is like that for me a little bit. I love the first season of Big Little Lies. I understand Leah Moriarty. I've read, I think, almost everything she's put out at this point.
Nice. Yeah.
But and Meryl Streep, obviously, a season 2, just alone for Meryl Streep was phenomenal.
Right.
But it's important to know when to stop.
Yeah. And the line, I will not be rich. That was needed.
I'm like saying.
Zeitgeist.
All right, Michelle.
Yeah.
According to the Women of Sacramento bio I read on you, because yes, we do our research on the pod.
Lovely. Thank you.
You've taught courses in media aesthetics, television criticism, as I mentioned, and rhetoric and social influence. So is there a particular course, talking about courses we've gotten to take that were influential for us, that has stood out to you in terms of student response, impact, or just lessons you've learned along the way?
Television criticism, that class is obviously my baby. But interestingly, it's not my baby. So here's a part of the story, my journey that I failed to mention. So as I'm reading, again, I'm a first year grad student. I'm reading this book and I come across this chapter, which is about Lieutenant Worf, who is a Klingon. And it's a chapter about how that character signifies racial, cultural, and national differences. When I read this chapter, my brain just exploded. I just couldn't wrap my brain around how great that was. And it was like reading somebody who was saying the kind of things that I wanted to say. So I read that chapter and I was like, well, I know what I want to do for my dissertation then, or for my thesis at that point. So I used that chapter as kind of the foundation piece, theoretically, for all of the work that I went on to do in my thesis. I went to the University of Florida for my PhD, ended up doing my dissertation also on Star Trek, but a different Star Trek series, and came back to Sacramento after getting the PhD. And I was just, looking for positions, but not like in the job hunt. I was teaching adjunct at a couple of different colleges. I had a friend who we would carpool. One day, my friend says, I'm not going to go to work on Friday because I have to go to a funeral. And I was like, oh, I'm so sad to hear that. Who was it that passed? I was one of the faculty at Sac State. And I'm like, oh no, who? And she said the name Leah Vandenberg. Leah Vandenberg was the author of that chapter that I had read in that book that changed my entire life, right?
Chills.
The fact that she was at Sac State and I was living in Sacramento and I didn't know it. Had I known, I would have camped out in front of her office and she'd be like, do you even go here? And I would have been like, no, I have a whole PhD, but I just want to learn more from you. So she had passed away. And so I was devastated, obviously, but her position at Sac State opened. I applied for it and That's how I ended up at Sac State, teaching at Sac State.
Wild, Michelle.
But it gets deeper.
Wow.
but it gets even deeper than that. So she created this class, television criticism. She wrote the class from the ground up. She wrote the textbook for the class. That's TV Crit. That's the class that now I teach. So it's not really my baby. It's her baby that I adopted and love. You know, it is my baby now.
That's mind-blowing, by the way.
That's a
look how the world works.
Yeah, that's a meant to be. This is, I mean, you don't need any other signs to tell you this was your path.
You're supposed to be here. Yeah. So I love that class. And I treat it with, you know, deep, deep respect for her vision, what she wanted the class to be, what she knew it could do, the way it could change people's perspective and, you know, everything. So I do love that class. But I have recently been developing a class on fandom. Soon come.
I was curious, like, have you ever attended Comic-Con?
I haven't, but when I tell you I want to so bad.
That sounds like the three of us are going to do a Comic-Con
Let's
trip.
do it. Let's go. I'm in.
All right. Do you believe in guilty pleasures in terms of media? Why or why not?
Yeah.
And then do you have one if you do?
So, you know, I was thinking a lot about this idea of the guilty pleasure when I was recording my last episode, which is about hate watches. And
Kardashians. Sorry.
See, no, yeah, exactly. We all have one, right? And so I think there's possibly a little bit of a blurry line between what is a hate watch and what is a guilty pleasure. So I think most people would define a guilty pleasure as something that they enjoy, but maybe they think they shouldn't, that other people would find it silly or you know, they wouldn't understand why you would like that, right? And so my thing with a guilty pleasure is let's not be guilty about what brings us pleasure, right? Like,
in all the ways, Michelle.
Right. Mm-hmm. Like, let's not feel guilty about finding pleasure and joy in the world. Like,
in this world, right?
Don't feel guilty about that.
I was inspired by a comment that Mindy Kaling said because she was doing an interview and she's like, my guilty pleasure. And she's like, you know what? I don't believe in them. She's like, I believe in pleasures and I enjoy ABC, XYZ. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm on a major reading binge.
Yes.
I've been consuming a lot of rom-coms lately.
Yeah.
I was never a rom-com novel reader.
Sure.
Ashley and I, we were only into like YA, dystopian future, Hunger Games, you know, Divergent. And so when it came to rom-coms, I never thought twice about it. But then we both, I was telling her that I was going through a hard time and I came across rom-com because there was a Black author and I was like, yes, center Black women in these stories. And so I started just reading. And
that was Jasmine, right? Guillory, you're talking about?
Jasmine Guillory.
Yeah.
And I've since, you know, come across several others. But what I ultimately realized, I had an aha moment. The reason why I enjoyed these stories, they're short, one, and then two, there's a happy ending and the happiness is the point.
Yes.
And I'm like, I can't get into novels right now whether I'm gonna cry or not if my protagonist dies. I need the happy ending. I need the resolution. And I was embarrassed to admit that, like, oh, I love rom-coms, you know?
No.
But I was like,
no shame. No.
They bring me joy.
Yeah, exactly. And so just, embrace that. And, you know, and there's a little bit of I think the nuance there is it's only a guilty pleasure because you think that other people would feel a way about it.
Yeah.
And so who cares what other people think?
That part. Yeah.
So, you know, the guilty, cut that off. Don't feel guilty about it. But now a hate watch is something different. And a hate watch is something different. I think we get a different, it's still pleasure, but it's a different kind of pleasure that we get from a hate watch.
I can tell you there's a project or a show that I started watching that I thought was going to be pleasurable. And now I'm just straight hate watching it to hopefully move through it. And it's
What
In the Dark on Netflix because it started where I thought it was going to be good. It was a recommendation. And actually my mom is the one who's forcing us to keep, has been forcing to keep going just to finish.
Yes.
But it's too much has happened. I stopped enjoying it, but it's kind of like becomes a hate watch because you're like, I don't love this, but I need to know the end. Basically to know what's going to happen. So
I know. And and that's an upcoming episode that I'm doing as well. Those shows that, let's just say that tune in the forthcoming weeks, because I want to talk about that. These shows that are like, why am I still in that part of the narrative? You know what I mean? Like, why do I continue to care about this? Or even worse, when you are committed to something, you're into it, you're there, and then they're like canceled. Goodbye. You don't ever get to know the end of that story.
Yes.
Those hit hard for me personally.
What brings you joy?
So the show lately that brought me extreme joy out of nowhere, I did not expect this show to hit like that, was a show called Claim to Fame. I just really loved it. It was so silly. You know, a lot of the shows that I gravitate to are the ones that are these very heavy, weighted, intense storylines with like, this is going to change how you look at this aspect of your life kind of programming. Claim to Fame is not that. It is not that. It is cotton candy. Literally, you put it in your mouth and it just melts. Did I even eat anything? I don't know, but I feel good and like buzzed after that, you know? And maybe it's a sugar rush and it's not going to last, but it's just, I loved that show. It was so fun. And because it also was a little bit of like, you know, I started having side conversations with people like, oh, well, who do you think so-and-so is? Like, oh, I think it's so-and-so. I think it's so-and-so, you know, with the people of Twitter. So that brought me joy, especially after 2 hours of The Bachelorettes, where I was like, we're all doomed as a species. You know, this is
I've
not
gone
good.
down the Bachelorette path, and it can be tough, especially just after all these years. You still see that most of those couples never make it past, you know, the engagement. And if they do, they're not together very long. Like what keeps us glued?
Just the motivations behind the contestants. They're not even hiding it anymore.
No.
Like they're like, I will be your
Bachelor in Paradise.
Right.
Brendan and whatever the other young lady's name was, that blew up
what was
in their faces.
And what was her name? We don't even know. It doesn't even matter. It's like, it doesn't matter.
Piper, Paige, one of those P's.
Oh, Piper. It was Piper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it extends beyond TV because then I'll go to their social media because I want to see, have they lost followers? Like, it's cyclical. It's an issue.
Yep. Because then we're like, I want to watch you reap your punishments.
Absolutely.
For the way that you behaved.
Especially because Natasha was my girl. But let me not go down this rabbit hole.
Right. Exactly. I'm like, we could just have a conversation about Bachelor Nation.
Yes.
We can do that.
And we love Rachel Lindsay because we listen to her learning podcast.
Adore her.
Love Rachel. Game changer.
Yes.
Game changer.
Fearless. I love how fearless she is for being able to speak up for what's right. And yes, I'm sure her being a lawyer does not hurt.
That didn't hurt. That didn't hurt.
She has such a great temperament for these types of situations that she finds herself in.
Right. For Rachel Lindsay alone, we are grateful for Bachelor Nation.
There you go. So speaking of favorite TV projects and joys, what is your favorite TV project of 2022 so far? And if you can't just name one, give me your top 3.
Yeah. So, I mean, Claim to Fame has been my favorite of the light and uplifting. You know, that's the one that I was excited about, where I would get home and I'd be like, let me jump on my TiVo and get this episode, that I was digging in all of the Twitter and all of that. I did love that. But I'm just, in terms of construction, I really appreciated W. Kamau Bell's limited series, We Need to Talk About Cosby. That's good TV because he's right. And we do need to talk about Cosby, and we need to have talked about Cosby a lot longer than we have been having that conversation. That, I would say, is one of my favorite things to come out of 2022 so far because of the conversation that needed to be had. But just in terms of like the spectacle, I have to take us over to House of the Dragon.
Yes.
I have to do it because when I tell you how fed up I was, like throwing things fed up at the end of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, we all were.
How I mean, the people who were paying attention were,
it's a dark time.
I was pissed off. And so like I was mad, like I knew those people personally and they had wronged me.
We are all on the same page because
I'm so glad.
I always say Game of Thrones is the best TV series ever, with the exception of season 8. Like we say that all the time.
Asterisk. There's an asterisk.
And
the greatest show of all time. Asterisk.
The ending of anything is everything. So
of course,
I cannot.
How did you not stick the landing?
Yeah,
how
because
did you
they
not?
were. I feel like the creators were already moved on.
Yeah.
In their minds, maybe in their hearts. You'd have to ask them.
Well, that's what they get. They were thinking, we're going to do Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly. They thought we got our next project in the bag. We're ready to go on with our lives. And you could feel it. Like in the fandom, we felt it. There's a reason why, as an audience, we rejected what happened.
Correct. The end of season 7, I was watching that episode, that season finale, in a fandom bar in Las Vegas with all the other thronies.
Wow.
And people were cosplaying. There was a woman there who, it was a bar and it was Las Vegas. But when I saw her, I was like, she's here. She's here. Like, I see Daenerys. Like, she's right there. Like, definitely not her, but you know what I mean? It wasn't.
Who knew there was a fandom bar in Vegas? You are putting us on.
I searched for it because I was in Vegas and I was like, but it's the finale.
This is such a good segue, Michelle.
Yes. Let's talk about it.
So, what are your thoughts on our society's fascination with Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon? There is so much violence and sexual indecency.
Yeah.
What does that have to say about us? I mean, the debauchery of it all. Like, Ashley and I recently recapped The Summer I Turned Pretty. And I'm having all types of crazy thoughts about the parental relationships. Like they're all swingers. And I'm like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah. I know. The show that sends me in that way that I start thinking like, oh, I maybe am not ready is Euphoria. That's the one that I'm like, tell me this is not
real life.
Please tell me this is not really how it is. But yeah, you know, I think, what does it say about me that I enjoy watching this, like you said, very violent, very, you know, and I think what it is that we are going to have those thoughts. That's just a natural thing that you think about, you know, violence, you think about sex, you think about these things, right? It's kind of like disassociating it. It's taking it outside of yourself and letting those thoughts live outside of you. So it's almost like exposure therapy a little bit, you know what I mean? That letting that person do it and say the things and take the actions.
The internet keeps making Rhaenyra and Damon, I always say his name wrong, but I'm also Black. So
well, and also it's spelled with a couple of little extra E's in there too.
They're trying to make that happen. And I'm like, it's not happening. Make it stop, please. Like, you know what I mean?
Why so many E's?
No, but like they're romanticizing that relationship. And I'm just like, no, I'm not there. Make it stop, please. So it's just a fascinating thing. And
I was telling Delora, I don't think I realized how much I have normalized the incest and everything that goes on in the Game of Thrones universe and House of the Dragon until I had to try to explain the last episode to my mom because she's never watched a single episode. And I was like, so right now, you know, they're at the funeral for Damon's wife, who was also his relative. And then he's now out with his niece, who's, you know, obviously he's known her since birth, but he tried to marry her when she was a child. And now she's an adult so now I guess she wants to be with him. And, she's also married to her cousin. And, so once I started breaking it down, I was like,
what is this? What am I watching?
How have I made all of this in my mind make sense for all of this time? I think, and going back to the original series real quick, I think the reason why for me, I rooted for Jon Snow and Dany was because they did not have the type of family relationship where he had known her, she had known him since they were children. Whereas this feels so much more icky because she's calling him uncle and saying, I need you at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in that sense, like, are we all low key open to incest, or is it just that
you know what I think it is?
Like, I shuttered any of the normal like social constraints that we have in life for the sake of following the story?
I don't think that we're like getting okay with it. I think more so it's like validation for yourself when you're like, I would never. So it's like you watch that and you're like, oh yeah, no, that's definitely a no for me. So we feel better about ourselves in that way because we're like, wow, like, did you really just kick that kid out of the window? Like he's a little kid. And you just, and in your pilot episode too, I was like,
episode 1.
Wow. I may be critical of myself and like there's things in life that I could do better. But you know what I've never done is kicked a little kid out of a window after getting down with my sibling.
We forget Jamie was a monster.
Yet
they humanized him so much.
His arc was fascinating.
Monster.
He backslid. What I will say is the fact that so many people were fine with Arya killing multitudes of people, but as soon as she decided to be a woman, oh no. Can't happen. I'm like, are you freaking serious?
Like, what are you talking about? Right.
I know we could talk. We could do a whole Game of Thrones episode. We may when we do a recap, because Delora wants to do a recap of House of the Dragon.
Yeah,
we may have to do a crossover episode with you.
Damn dragons. Yeah, absolutely. I'd be into that. I had a grad student who wrote her entire thesis on Game of Thrones. So
I love
how many pages was it?
A lot. Her basic argument was that when we talk about Game of Thrones, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, it's a very feminist text because we've got these women, they don't take any shit from anybody and they are badasses and they're this and they're that and they're the queen and they're blah, blah, blah. And she was like, nah, we're fooling ourselves if we look at Game of Thrones as a feminist text at all, but also specifically because of the perpetuation of the rape myth in 3 characters specifically. And Jamie was one of those characters. The way that the text encourages us to like forgive him and, oh, well, he didn't mean it that way. You know what I mean? But he's a rapist, but he's a good guy in general, right? Like how? No. You don't just accidentally rape somebody.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. So
that could be a whole nother conversation too.
Right.
In terms of the humanity that so often I feel like we do with villainous characters across the board in entertainment. I felt that like I'm not sure if you got into that show on Netflix.
I had a student in class the other day trying to convince me that he doesn't mean to be a serial killer. And I was like, he's a serial killer.
Joe is a stone cold serial killer. And this is not Dexter. Joe does not kill bad guys. Joe kills regular people.
Yeah.
But justifies it. And because we're in his head as an audience, we justify it.
It's working on at least that student. It is working on that student. And I was like, no. Like, I have to draw the line here. I want to let you explore and like come to this. No, but you're wrong.
This is why your job must be incredible, because
I love it. Because I get into these conversations.
All of these things. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So I do have one more question for you.
Sure.
Speaking of society.
Yes.
Is there a correlation between popular shows and current world events? The example that I have is the rise of The Masked Singer and how it's paired with the reality of the pandemic. I joke with Ashley all the time. Scandal would not have been able to survive into Trump's presidency like it did in Obama's presidency. Things along those lines.
House of Cards, we were done with all of that ish.
Yeah, it felt too real.
Even
Correct.
Veep, which I loved. I loved Veep. Veep was like, we can't top. This was satirical. We can't top anything that's going on.
Right. I have a quote for you on that line. Shonda Rhimes did an interview with the Hollywood Reporter. This is what she said. So this is Shonda Rhimes talking. She said, talking about Scandal, there was a very specific planned progression that was going to be easy to tell because Hillary was going to be president and we were going to be living in the light. But it didn't occur. I'm still trying to come to terms with that. One bad thing after another keeps happening, and the world feels very unstable. So, in a world in which all of the things that we would write on Scandal are happening in real life, it's very hard to write Scandal the way we used to, when it was like, let's make Washington the most outrageous, horrifying place it could ever be. Wow. I used to know how it ended. And then Donald Trump was elected. We had a destination, and I don't know if that's our destination anymore.
Wow. But that's why we have Bridgerton, right?
I guess.
The joy, the sexiness.
Find the joy.
No.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, so to answer your question, there's 100% a correlation between what's happening in the world and what's happening in television. We are working through our fears, our concerns, our frustrations. The creators of those programs are working through their feelings about what's going on in creating the shows. And then we are working through those same things as we're processing and interpreting what they've made for us. So it really, we're all just in a big conversation with each other, just trying to heal. And like Shonda Rhimes said, just trying to live in the light.
Couple more things for you, and we're going to let you get out of here. We could not have an episode with the TV doctor without getting our prescription.
Okay.
Delora and I have both dealt with work stresses this year and some major job transitions. So what would you prescribe for us to tackle the anxiety and, let's be honest, self-doubt that can come with beginning anew?
So have you all watched The Umbrella Academy?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. So this last season was very much, I think, a lesson in 2 chapters. One chapter being what was going on with Allison, which is what not to do and how not to deal with that kind of transitional stress. And then Victor. So the transition from Vanya to Victor, while it's a different kind of transition than what you all are talking about, I think it's still the lesson that can be learned from that is that's one of the most monumental and personal transitions that someone can go through. Mm-hmm. And the bravery that it takes to kind of step into where you are, right? As opposed to where you've been or what people think you should be. Watching Victor be rewarded for that bravery, I thought was really, really special. So getting to watch all of the people around Victor be like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, that's fine. So let's go ahead and save the world. If you're like, are you good? Like, let's go. That I thought was just fantastic. So for someone who is feeling anxiety about stepping into a new role, especially if it's a role that is maybe different than what other people expected or maybe would have picked for you, I think watching Allison is don't do it like this. Maybe do it like Victor did it.
All right. Well, doctor, guess what?
Oh,
we've taken that prescription. Okay.
Oh,
we have
yay.
utilized it. So we appreciate.
I love that worked out for you. No side effects.
No side effects to speak of, except for, and I don't want to spoil this, there was one scene that gave me the heebie-jeebies, but it's because I have a thing with like clusters and bugs.
Yes.
And so you probably know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no side effects from that prescription.
Well, okay.
So we thank you so much. Final question for you. And
yes.
I almost want to go go full circle a bit back to even you kind of talking about the racial aspects and how great it was for you to find Star Trek as a child to help you explain things. When we talk about your path, and I want to get some advice from you, one of the things that was really touching to me in a previous conversation we've had with the wonderful Carla Renata, she is a film critic, but we talked about the lack of representation, particularly for Black women within that industry. So you being on the other side of that as being the educator, as having these students come to you, what advice do you have for those who want to follow on your path, and how important is it for you to continue that path of representation within the industry?
You know, faculty like to make disciples. There's nothing more exciting for me than when I am watching someone in my class light up the way I lit up when it happened to me, right? So when I realize that I have basically activated a TV monster like me, then I'm like, okay, what do I have to do to make sure that you are able to do this as well? And it's that much sweeter when it's also somebody who looks like me and who is willing to join this fight to call out because, you know, this conversation that we've had has been essentially a big old love letter to TV, but that doesn't mean that there are not problems, deep, serious problems with television, right? And how, as much as it can build us up and help us see ourselves as beautiful, etc., it can, and it, not only can it, but it is in the active mission 24/7, 365 of tearing us down as well. And the only way to counteract that is to become activated, like I said, to start seeing what's there just beneath what you thought was there, right? So when I see somebody in my class who looks like me and comes from the same background and perspective as I do, who is willing to say the things about this medium that are hard to say, it's uncomfortable to say these things, but we have to, because that's the only way, right? I think back to we have to talk about Cosby. Yeah, we do. We need to talk about that. And we need to talk about all these other things as well. We need to talk about the rape myth. We need to talk about what I'm calling representational justice, right? It's so important that we are a team, right? So we got to have people behind the camera. We got to have people on the writing staff. We got to have people in front of the camera acting. It's not just about we got one, that's enough. It's about telling and representing our truths. And then we got to have people who are teaching it and who are studying it and being critical of it, because we have to approach it from all angles. We got to close in on it. That's the only way to get forward.
Any advice for those who want to follow your path and go the academic route?
Yeah. Yeah, do it. That's my advice. Honestly, you know, the saying, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. That's a lie. that is just a pure lie. That is not true. But so I'll offer an adjustment to that. If you love what you do, you'll be okay with it being work, you know? But it's still work, honey. It is work, but it's the best kind of work to do. And if you are willing to delay that gratification, right? The process of getting here for me was a long one. And I think a lot of folks now are unwilling to kind of delay that gratification. It's like, I need it now. I want to know right now. So the idea of 4 years of undergrad, 2 years of a master's, 4 to 5 years of a PhD, then a couple of years on the job market before you get a tenure track job, and then 6 years to tenure, and another 4 to associate, and then another 4 to full professor. People are like, wait, is that 50? How many, you know what I mean? It can't even math that up, right? But it's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it. So if you are committed to it, if you know that if you've had that moment where, like, me falling into that position of my academic hero, if you've gotten that sign that you're like, this is where I have to be, then you got to do it. And if you're just willing to kind of delay that gratification a little bit, there's gratifying moments along the way. There should be enough to sustain you.
Love it.
And find people you trust.
That's real.
And
That's
listen
really
to them.
Real. I was going to say, to your point earlier, our conversation has overall been a love fest for television.
Yeah.
But if you think about it from the critical eye, a lot of the projects we're mentioning are recent projects. You know, we're just getting here, right? So yeah, this has been great.
Michele, thank you so much for joining us for our In Conversation with you. We hope that the lovely listeners have gotten some great gems along the way. And again, we hope to have you back to do possibly our recap of House of the Dragon. But if not that, then something so that we can just sink our teeth in and get in even more into our discussion about some of these projects that we love. Yes. But again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure has been mine.
Thank you.
Whew. I feel like we could have talked to her for a while. We had a lot. We could have unpacked.
Absolutely. I appreciate her. I mean, this is what she does for a living, but her critical eye, I appreciate that so much. And yeah, she's living the dream, actually.
No, seriously. I love talking about television. So to get to do it professionally is definitely ideal. Guys, stay tuned. We may be hopping on to Dr. Michele Foss's podcast, which is the TV Doctor. So stay tuned for that. In her podcast, the description is that she prescribes the television you should be watching to heal whatever ails you. So we're excited. We look forward to it for sure. Talk more GOT and House of the Dragon and all that good stuff.
Them dragons.
And it was a hidden gem. So guys, be sure to go and check out her podcast in the meantime. But otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Bye.